Beneath the beaches, behind the redwoods, and under the concrete freeways of California, something ancient is stirring. For every golden postcard view, there's a shadow just out of frame, watching, waiting, walking, giants in the forests, serpents in the lakes, winged things overhead. This isn't just folklore, it's a map of everything we pretend not to see. So light a candle, lock the doors, and forget the brochure version. You're about to meet 30 terrifying mythical creatures of California, and some of them might still be out there. Welcome to the side of California they don't put on the license plate. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next shadow creeping in from the edge of the map. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Midnight in the Mojave? Dawn in Detroit? We want to know who else is wide awake with the things that go bump in the dark. 1. Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the mystic forests of Northern California, where the trees outlive empire and the fog curls like something thinking. People still vanish without leaving behind so much as a boot print. The explanations, when they come, are sterile, disorientation, dehydration, wandering off. But the locals will tell you, with a sideways glance and a careful tone, that the redwoods have a memory, and they remember things much older than hikers. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Pacific Giant. He's the celebrity cryptid, the frontman of the unknown. But the California version is different. Not just in seed, though reports clock him at 9 feet tall, with shoulders like overturned bathtubs, but in attitude. This Bigfoot doesn't just hide, he watches. The earliest whispers came from the indigenous peoples of the region. The Hoopa, the Yurok, the Kuruk. They didn't talk about Bigfoot like a monster. He wasn't hunted or hated. He was a forest elder, a guardian, sometimes a thief, always a presence. Not quite friend, not quite foe, more like nature personified, furred and upright, and smarter than you'd hope. Then came the loggers. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the gold rush was over, but the trees were still standing, and men with saws and dynamite moved in. That's when the stories shifted. Hairy creatures in the tree line, eyes reflecting light in the dead of night, and then footprints, massive ones, 15 inches long, 6 inches wide, pressed into the wet soil like a signature. By the 1950s, Northern California was thick with sightings. Bluff Creek became the Vatican of Sasquatchology. The infamous Patterson-Gimlin film, you know the one, grainy and wobbly, the ape-like figure turning mid-stride, was shot there in 1967. And while skeptics have spent decades calling it a hoax, frame-by-frame analysis still can't quite explain the muscle movement, or the proportions, or the fact that two seasoned men with no background in visual effects managed to fake something even AI struggles to duplicate. But here's where it gets stranger. Many who claim to have seen Bigfoot describe something wrong, not just a giant primate, but a wrongness in the air. Electronics die, animals vanish, some people lose time. One camper near Orleans, California, reported that his compass spun in circles for 20 minutes after an encounter. Another woke to find massive handprints, human-like, 5 fingers, no claws, pressed into the windows of his truck, 30 miles from the nearest town. Scientists, of course, scoff. They talk about bare misidentification, mass hysteria, and the powerful effect of folklore on the human mind. But they've also never explained how over 3,000 separate Bigfoot sightings have been logged across California alone. That's more than earthquakes, more than shark attacks, more than cougar sightings. And those are real animals, real dangers. Maybe Bigfoot is a holdover from another epoch. Maybe he's a psychological projection, a guilt-fueled avatar of the wilderness we keep trying to tame. Or maybe, and this is the version the trees seem to prefer, maybe he's just really good at staying hidden because he's meant to be. And if Bigfoot is the watcher of forests, what watches the cliffs? Let's go south to where the mountains fall into the sea and the shadows walk without feet. 2. Dark watchers, los vigilantes oscuros, along the spine of the Santa Lucia Mountains where the chaparral folds into steep ravines and the wind sounds suspiciously like whispering. Something waits, not a beast exactly, not a ghost either. The Spanish called them los vigilantes oscuros, the dark watchers, not because of what they did, but because of how they watched. Silently, motionlessly, endlessly. You'll hear about them if you spend enough time in Big Sur. Not from the tourists, of course. They're too busy Instagramming fog and deer, but the locals know. Hikers vanish, cameras fail, shapes stand on the ridge lines tall and still, usually at twilight. You look once, they're there. You look again, they're gone. But the unease doesn't leave with them. It lingers like a thought someone else planted in your head. The first written mentions came from Spanish settlers in the 1700s. Their journals, the ones that survived, describe tall, black silhouettes of men watching them from the peaks. The figures never approached, never spoke, but they were always there at dusk, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, standing, observing. Then came John Steinbeck. Yes, that's Steinbeck, the Nobel Prize-winning chronicler of dusty farms and broken men. In a 1938 essay, he described his own father's encounters with the Watchers while hiking in the Santa Lucias. His father, a man not prone to superstition, would regularly return with stories of tall, shadowy figures on the ridges. Once he climbed toward one, thinking it was another hiker, but when he reached the spot, there was nothing. No person, no trail, just scorched earth and the feeling of being watched. And that's the thing. The Watchers don't do anything. They don't chase, they don't howl, they just stand and watch, which, if we're being honest, is somehow worse. Witnesses describe them as human-shaped but oversized, sometimes 8 or 9 feet tall, dressed in long cloaks or wide-brimmed hats, like outdated shadows from another century. Their features are always obscured, either by distance, fog, or some internal logic of shadow. You can't get close, you can't photograph them. The moment you try, they vanish, but not before you feel something cold burrow behind your ribs, a quiet certainty that they saw you first. Explanations? Oh, the scientists try. Shadow people, they say. Pareidolia, your brain filling in humanoid shapes in the rocks and mist. It's your retina tricking your frontal lobe, or it's dehydration, isolation, altitude, light refracted just, no, but that doesn't explain why so many people across decades report nearly identical experiences and emotions. They don't just see the Watchers, they feel them, and not with awe, with dread. Some theories suggest they're interdimensional observers, slipping between veils at dusk. Others call them echoes, the after images of something terrible that once happened in those hills and never fully left. The Chumash, who lived in these lands long before highways or hiking boots, have stories too. They speak of spirits who live on the mountains, who should not be named aloud. The price of acknowledgement, they say, is attention, and attention from these beings is dangerous. What's most curious is their timing. The Watchers only appear at the edge of night, never in the full glare of day, never quite at dark, always when the sky is unsure, like they need indecision to slip through, which raises the question, what are they watching for? A return, a sign, a mistake? No one knows, but if they are watching us, it might be wise to ask, who watched them first? And if standing shadows weren't enough, wait until you meet what's swimming beneath the still blue surface of California's deepest lake. If you're still with us after the dark Watchers, you're exactly the kind of person we want around. Go ahead and subscribe. We've got a lot more shadows to walk through. And drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Just curious who else is out here trading sleep for stories. 3. Tahoe, Tessie Lake. Tahoe is unnaturally blue, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Its water, filtered by layers of granite and time, is so clear it seems to glow from below, like the lake is lit by something it won't explain. And if you stare long enough into that impossible blueness, past the shimmer and into the quiet, you might start to notice something moving, large, slow, too fluid to be machinery, too smooth to be a wave, something that curves. The locals call it Tahoe Tessie, which is cute until you realize the nickname was likely invented as a joke, or maybe as camouflage, because no one who's actually seen the thing calls it cute. The Washoe people, the original inhabitants of the region, didn't joke about the lake. They avoided its deeper sections entirely. Their stories, passed down in the hushed tones reserved for sacred warnings, spoke of spirits in the water, dangerous ones, not evil necessarily, but indifferent, the kind of force that doesn't care whether you live or die, only whether you've crossed a line. And then the settlers arrived, armed with boats and bravado. That's when the sightings began. Long, serpentine forms beneath the surface, humps rising and falling like the back of some submerged giant, glimpses of a reptilian head, sometimes horse-like, sometimes more draconic, just breaking the surface before vanishing again. One fisherman in the 1950s claimed to see a creature the size of a school bus gliding just under his rowboat, casting a shadow so vast it made the water beneath him go black. He never fished the lake again. Skeptics point to sturgeon. Logical, plausible. There are, in fact, giant sturgeon in North America. Ancient fish with armored scales and a tendency to ignore the laws of size, but sturgeon aren't sleek. They don't move like dancers, and none of them have been documented in Lake Tahoe at the sizes described. Then there's the sonar data. In 1979, a research team using subsurface sonar equipment reported detecting an unidentifiable moving object at a depth of over 600 feet. It was massive, roughly 30 feet in length, and moved independently, not with the currents. Attempts to pursue it failed, not because it was fast, but because it simply sank deeper into the lake, past the reach of equipment, into a trench known only by topographic maps and rumor. One of those rumors that Lake Tahoe is connected through an elaborate underground cave system to Pyramid Lake in Nevada, which, you guessed it, has its own legends of water spirits, drowning ghosts, and unnamed serpents. A few believe Tessie isn't one creature at all, but a species, or worse, something that was once many, now reduced to a last survivor, a relic too old to die, too smart to surface for long. Environmentalists have occasionally tried to explain the myth away as pollution-induced hallucination, the result of mercury in fish, or simple isolation-based paranoia, but that doesn't explain the consistency. Descriptions of Tessie have remained weirdly uniform for over a century. Long, undulating body, dark ridged back, occasionally greenish-black skin, with the eerie ability to appear closer than it should be. People who've seen it don't usually go public because it sounds ridiculous, because it's hard to prove, because sometimes it's easier to dismiss your own eyes than it is to admit the lake is watching you back. And even if you don't believe in lake monsters, let me ask you this. When was the last time you were sure you were ailleurs on the water? And if what lives in the lake walks like a snake, what do we make of the creature that walks without a body? In the dead streets of the Central Valley, where even the streetlights seem afraid to blink? 4. Fresno Nightcrawler. Fresno is the kind of place most people drive through. Flat, dry, and unnervingly symmetrical, it stretches out like someone dragged a ruler across the map and called it civilization. It has farmland, tract homes, and heat that feels like punishment. But around 3 a.m., when the roads go silent and the sprinklers whisper their mechanical lullabies, Fresno becomes something else entirely. That's when they start walking. The Fresno Nightcrawler doesn't fit into any established category of cryptid. It doesn't growl, doesn't fly, doesn't even have arms. It's not hairy or scaly or especially intimidating, and yet it is deeply, viscerally, the way a blank face in a crowd can be more terrifying than a monster in the mirror. Here's what witnesses, and now video footage, have shown: two long, impossibly thin legs, white, cloth-like, sometimes with a small, rounded torso on top, sometimes with nothing at all. No arms, no head, just legs, walking slowly across lawns and roads as if gravity were optional. The gait is strange, gliding more than stepping, as if the creature's feet barely touch the ground, and it moves with purpose, as though it knows exactly where it's going, and that you don't. The first widely publicized sighting came from surveillance footage in 2007. A Fresno resident, trying to figure out why his dogs kept barking at night, set up a security camera aimed at his front yard. What he captured was so bizarre, so quietly wrong, that it quickly went viral. The video shows two figures, white, spindly, floating forward on stilt-like legs, their motion hypnotic and unsettling. There was no sound, no obvious explanation, just the sense that something was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and somehow it knew it. Experts tried to dissect the video, puppets, hoax, animation, yet none of the practical explanations ever lined up with the footage's physics. The shadows were correct. The movement was natural, or rather unnaturally smooth. No strings, no signs of editing. Whatever it was there, on camera, walking through someone's yard like it had done it 1,000 times. Theories flooded in. Some say it's an alien, a biological surveillance drone sent to walk unnoticed among humans, as if two disembodied legs wouldn't draw notice. Others believe it's a spirit, an echo of some local tragedy, too obscure for even folklore to preserve. A few cryptozoologists, stretching the limits of their field, suggest it's a heretofore unknown species, nocturnal, silent, and utterly alien to mammalian structure. But the strangest theory, that it isn't walking at all, that what we're seeing is not a creature in motion, but a projection, a puppet made of light and absence, like a shadow cast by something we can't perceive directly, a sort of interdimensional afterimage flickering through on repeat. And then there are the reports of similar figures seen not just in Fresno, but in other parts of the Central Valley, Clovis, Merced, even as far as Yosemite's outer edges, some in daylight, most at night, always the same description: two white legs, silently gliding by, unaware or uninterested in the fact that it doesn't make sense. Unlike Bigfoot, who feels wild and animal, or Tessie, who feels ancient and submerged, the Fresno nightcrawler feels clinical, artificial, as if it was built, not born, not here to scare you, just to study you, or worse, to ignore you completely, like a maintenance bot walking through a glitch in the simulation. And if a pair of sentient legs can haunt a city, what else might be lurking where desert meets myth, where California's forests end and something far more sunburnt and strange begins to stir? 5. Yucca Man. There are places in California where the sky feels heavier, not darker, just or just closer, where the sun bakes the landscape into strange, quiet shapes, and the wind whistles through rocks that look a little too much like faces. That's the Mojave Desert. Endless scrub, scattered Joshua trees, and silence so complete it feels like pressure on your ears. People go out there for isolation, for staging, for that off-grid fantasy. What they often find instead is something watching them from just beyond the glow of the campfire. They call it the Yucca Man. He's described like a cousin of Bigfoot, but rougher, wilder, less reclusive, and far more unpredictable. Where Northern California's Sasquatch is reported as shy, even gentle, the Yucca Man is not. This desert beast isn't hiding in dense redwoods. He's out on the open plains in plain sight, staring across miles of sand with eyes that reflect red in the dark, 7 to 10 feet tall, covered in matted hair, the color of the desert floor, with limbs that don't seem built for human-like movement. He walks crooked, like he was made in a rush, or like he's not used to gravity. First reports came from military personnel. In the early 1970s, at the edges of the 29 Palms Marine Base, a guard on night duty reported something massive approaching the fence line, not walking, stalking. He claimed it was hairy, with broad shoulders and eyes that shone in the dark like coals. It let out a low growl and vanished before backup arrived. His radio failed during the encounter, something not uncommon in later reports. After that, the stories multiplied. Soldiers on patrol swore they saw something crouching behind Joshua trees, trees far too thin to hide anything that size. Campers woke up to find their tents torn open, but nothing stolen, just opened, as if something had to check. Occasionally, footprints appeared overnight in isolated canyons, not bear prints, not human, something in between, wide, deep, with a stride too long for any person, and no return trail. Skeptics argue it's just another Sasquatch variant. Maybe it's the desert playing tricks on people dehydrated and disoriented, but that doesn't explain how often it's seen near military sites, Edwards Air Force Base, China Lake, Fort Irwin, places with surveillance, guards, sensors, places where wandering stoners in gorilla suits wouldn't last 5 minutes. Some believe the Yucca Man is not a cryptid, but something else. A remnant, a guardian, a creature not of the earth, but left behind on it, either by something cosmic or something ancient. One fringe theory claims the creature is drawn to radiation and electromagnetic fields. Another says the Mojave, with its strange geology and vortex-like energy zones, is a natural portal, and the Yucca Man, just the unlucky doorman. What makes the legend especially eerie is the attitude. Witnesses say it doesn't seem afraid of people. It doesn't run. It stands and watches. Sometimes it approaches. Sometimes it follows, not because it's hunting, but because it's curious, and curiosity in the desert feels like a warning. You can't outrun something that doesn't mind the heat, and the Yucca Man doesn't just endure the desert, he belongs to it. He is it, a walking embodiment of everything you can't quite name about this place. And just when you think you've survived the worst, the Mojave can throw at you a hulking silent giant in the brush. You remember the legends that say the real monsters aren't born, they're made in dark rituals with stolen names and faces that change. 6. Joshua Tree Skinwalkers. Joshua Tree is beautiful in the way haunted places often are, alien, elegant, and deeply still. The strange, twisted trees look like something from a dream you shouldn't be having, clawing at the sky like frozen lightning. Beneath them, the rocks stack themselves into impossible towers, balanced like ancient puzzles no one solved. It's the kind of place that feels watched, not in a metaphorical sense, in a measurable one. People report it, equipment records it, something is looking back. But it isn't the Yucca Man this time, and it isn't curious. It already knows you. The stories of skinwalkers aren't native to this exact region, but they've taken root here anyway, like something invasive that thrives in isolation. Originally from Navajo lore, the term skinwalker refers to a type of witch, one that has crossed a sacred line, a person who has given up their humanity in exchange for the ability to transform, to wear the skin of another living thing, not metaphorically, literally. They become coyotes, owls, wolves, even humans, but wrong, slightly wrong, off by a degree or two, like a face you almost recognize but don't trust. Joshua Tree locals have their own version of these legends. Hikers speak of voices calling out from behind boulders, voices of people they know, saying things those people wouldn't say. Campers report seeing figures at the edge of their campsites, silhouettes shaped like animals walking on two legs, or worse, shaped like people crawling on all fours. The movement is always jerky, like a puppet handled by someone who doesn't quite understand joints. There are tales of travelers breaking down along remote stretches of road, only to see a familiar figure approaching in the rearview mirror, a friend, a family member, smiling too widely, walking without blinking. Sometimes they knock on the window, sometimes they don't have to. The car dies, the lights go out, and when help finally comes hours later, there are no footprints in the sand. Rational minds try to explain this away. Heat stroke, isolation, high desert altitude, messing with oxygen levels. Some go further, suggesting military experiments or electromagnetic anomalies interfering with perception. And Joshua Tree does sit atop a lattice of oddities, natural faults, magnetic hotspots, even rumored underground tunnels that no one officially acknowledges. But none of that explains the specific behavior reported across these encounters, because the creatures don't just appear, they mimic one recurring detail: the sound of a loved one calling your name from the darkness. The voice is right, pitch, tone, even inflection, but the timing is wrong. The emotion is missing, like it's been copied from memory, but the soul didn't come through. Indigenous communities warn not to speak the name aloud, not to describe what you've seen in detail, because doing so invites it closer. Recognition is permission. Knowing its face means it knows yours. And Joshua Tree, with its strange stillness and ancient energy, offers the perfect stage. Shadows stretch longer here, sound carries farther, and if a creature can wear your skin, your voice, your face, who's going to warn the others? But even shapeshifters need somewhere to rest, somewhere quiet, somewhere almost forgotten, like the dry, sun-bleached camps of California's past, where men once worked with shovels and dynamite, and sometimes vanished between three-legged footsteps in the dust. 7. Tripodero. Some creatures hide in the forest, others stalk the deep. The tripodero, however, waits in the dust, in the chaparral, in the scrubby hillsides, where the grass crunches underfoot and nothing grows quite right. You won't find it in children's books or on trendy cryptid merch. This thing isn't famous, but in certain circles, old hunters, road workers, forgotten folk storytellers, it's known and it's avoided. The legend goes back to the late 1800s, when California was halfway between wild and wired. Settlers and workers were laying railroads and digging mines, pushing deeper into areas the maps hadn't bothered with yet. And that's when they started talking about it: a creature with 3 legs, no arms, and a face like a warthog that lost a bar fight. But the most unsettling part: the legs, long, jointed, piston-like. One witness described them as like camera tripods turned upside down and gone mean. The tripodero, as it came to be called, used these legs not just to move, but to launch itself, straight up, straight out, sometimes sideways. It didn't run. It didn't slink. It compressed and sprang like a steel trap wearing a skin suit. Reportedly nocturnal, it was most often seen at dusk or dawn, those in-between hours when the light doesn't know what to do with itself. Construction workers near Sonora once claimed their tools went missing overnight, only to be found 2 miles away, scattered around a set of strange triangular prints, each print deep, symmetrical, and spaced far too wide for a normal animal. One man said it felt like whatever made those prints wasn't walking, it was touching down. Another incident from the 1930s involved a road crew working near the Sierra foothills. According to a surviving journal entry from one of the men, they heard a sharp hissing sound around midnight. Not a snake, but mechanical, like air pressure releasing. Then something moved past the tent. Fast, too fast. The next morning, one of their markers, a heavy steel stake, had been driven clean into the ground, a full foot deeper than any man there could manage. Beside it, three prints, dry, precise, unexplained. Some versions of the legend even describe the Tripodero as a kind of biomechanical creature, part organic, part machine. Not literally, of course, but in function. No known animal moves like that. No muscles fire with that kind of explosive directional force. And nothing native to California can leap 30 feet from a standstill and land without a sound. Local folklore doesn't offer much by way of origin. Some say it's a mutated survivor of some forgotten species, adapted to the hills like a predator from a failed planet. Others whisper that it was summoned, that it didn't walk out of the wilderness, it walked out of a mine shaft. Whatever the case, the stories are consistent. It doesn't like noise, it doesn't like light, and it always comes back to the places where it was first seen. These days, reports have dwindled, or maybe people just stopped telling the stories. But if you're driving alone through California's dusty back roads and you see three deep marks in the ground, spaced perfectly apart, triangulated like a math problem with teeth, don't wait around. Because if the Tripodero is watching, it's not for company, it's calculating. And speaking of watchers beneath the hills, our next legend climbs a little higher, up the slopes of California's most mystical peak, where the snow never melts and the people you meet might not be people at all. 8. Lemurians of Mount Shasta. Mount Shasta is a volcano, technically, but if you've ever stood beneath it, really stood there, with the wind pressing your jacket flat and the clouds swirling like they forgot which century it was, volcano starts to feel like a poor word. Mount Shasta doesn't feel geological, it feels intentional. And people have been saying that for centuries because, according to a very specific, very persistent set of beliefs, the mountain is not just a mountain, it's a door, and someone or something lives on the other side. Enter the Lemurians. The story starts weird and only gets weirder. In the late 1800s, California newspapers began printing letters and first-hand accounts from travelers who claimed to have encountered tall, robed beings living inside Mount Shasta. Not near it, inside it. They described these beings as radiant, elegant, humanoid, but somehow off, too graceful, too symmetrical. They spoke perfect English, or sometimes they didn't speak at all, but communicated directly into the mind. Their origin? A lost continent, not Atlantis. That would be too mainstream. These beings were survivors of Lemuria, a theoretical sunken land in the Pacific, supposedly home to a spiritually advanced civilization that vanished beneath the waves long before recorded history. Mount Shasta, according to the legend, was their sanctuary and their temple, and possibly their repair shop, depending on which version you hear. Modern interpretations have woven the Lemurians into a strange tapestry of New Age mysticism, fringe science, and deeply American folklore. They are said to inhabit vast underground cities of crystal and gold, the most famous of which is called Telos, where they meditate, study energy frequencies, and watch over humanity with a kind of condescending patience. Think of them as enlightened roommates we didn't ask for and probably can't impress. Skeptics, of course, have tried to peel the myth apart. Some say the stories emerged from a 19th century novel that local spiritualists took too seriously. Others blame it on a blend of theosophy, early UFO culture, and the general human tendency to invent gods with better posture than ourselves. And yet, people keep seeing things. Campers report glowing orbs disappearing into the tree line. Hikers find symbols carved into the rocks, not graffiti, but something stranger, more geometric. Occasionally, someone stumbles onto a cave entrance that wasn't there the day before, or claims to hear music from inside the mountain, echoing through stone like wind through a pipe organ. What's most compelling is how deliberately the stories persist. Whole communities have grown around them. Stores in the town of Shasta sell Lemurian crystals, books on interdimensional gateways, and vortex maps showing the places where reality thins. The mountain is both a tourist trap and a spiritual nexus. People come for answers. They usually leave with better questions because whether or not the Lemurians are real in the flesh and blood sense, the idea of them is hard to shake. An ancient, advanced race living in silence beneath our feet, watching, waiting, glowing faintly under layers of earth and secrecy. It hits something primal, the fear that we're not alone, and the deeper fear that someone out there is better at being us than we are. And if the high places of California hide enlightened beings beneath their snow, what about the spirits that burn in the canyons? The ones that leave scorched footprints, fire in the sky, and stories older than the mountain itself. 9. Taquit's spirit, Mount San Jacinto, stands like a fortress above Palm Springs, not just tall, but aloof. It doesn't roll gently that into the landscape like other California ranges. It juts upward, sheer and defiant, as if trying to tear a hole in the sky. And nestled in its shadow is something older than roads, older than weather reports, older than even the mountain itself, the spirit known as Taquits. The name echoes through Cahuilla, Luiseño, and Kumeyaay traditions, whispered, not spoken loudly. Taquits is not a creature in the usual sense. He's not a beast or a cryptid or even a ghost. He's a presence, part elemental force, part vengeful echo, part hungry watcher. In some stories, he was once human, a shaman who became too powerful, too ambitious, and was transformed or corrupted into something that could no longer live among people. What he became depends on who's telling the story. Sometimes he's a fire spirit, leaving scorch marks across the cliffs. Sometimes he's a luminous figure that glides across the mountain peaks, glowing green or red like an ember. Sometimes he's a meteor, streaking across the desert sky and vanishing behind the ridgeline as if re-entering the world. But the constants remain. He haunts the mountain, he watches the valley, and those who encounter him don't come away unchanged. One of the most enduring parts of the legend is his appetite, not for food, but for life. It's said that he draws energy from people who linger too long on the slopes, that hikers who camp alone near Taquit's Canyon wake up exhausted, as if something pulled the dreams out of their heads. Some report missing time, others say they see lights in the sky, low, flickering, moving against the wind, only to realize the forest around them has gone too quiet. In certain tribal versions, Taquits resides deep within the mountain in a hidden cave. His breath causes the violent winds that sometimes sweep through the pass. His anger causes rock slides. When he appears, it is often a warning of imbalance, of disrespect, of something coming. Settler legends quickly absorbed and twisted the older stories. In the early 1900s, Palm Springs was just beginning to develop as a resort town, and tales of Taquits were conveniently rebranded as spooky local flavor. But even then, strange things were reported. In 1918, a prospector went missing near Taquits Peak. His body was never found, but his camp was discovered, untouched, fire still smoldering, gear intact, as if he'd simply walked away or been pulled away. Hikers today still talk about that feeling, a pressure in the air near the canyon, the sensation of being observed from above, not by wildlife, but by something vertical. Some even claim to have photographed orbs near the peak or shadows that don't line up with the sun. Scientists, of course, blame the desert heat, elevation sickness, or the brain's response to isolation, but they can't explain the frequency or the consistency or why so many locals, indigenous and otherwise, refuse to hike that canyon after dark. Because if Mount Shasta is the home of transcendent beings and cosmic wisdom, then Mount San Jacinto is something else entirely. It doesn't invite you in, it dares you. And while fire spirits haunt the mountaintops, something else spreads its wings over the water below. Not divine, not enlightened, but predatory and always hungry. 10. Ong Washoe folklore, Lake Tahoe is beautiful in a way that doesn't entirely make sense. It's too blue, too still, too deep, like it's holding its breath. The Washoe people who have lived in the region for thousands of years never saw it as just a lake. To them, it was sacred, alive, and deeply dangerous. They told stories, old ones, about beings that lived in its depths and flew above its surface, beings with wings, beings with faces, beings like Ong. Ong, in Washoe folklore, is no gentle forest spirit or misunderstood guardian. Ong is a giant bird, but not the kind you'd want to spot overhead. Picture something eagle-like in shape, but not in spirit. It's said to have the wingspan of a small aircraft and the face of a warrior, human-like, expressionless, and full of cold intent. Some versions describe it with piercing eyes and a beak lined not with teeth, but with serrated edges like flint blades. It doesn't just fly, it hunts. According to legend, Ong would descend silently from the skies to snatch wanderers, those who strayed too far from the path or ventured too close to sacred water without permission. Victims were rarely found. If they were, the stories say they had no wounds, no signs of a struggle, just gone, as if erased. The implication being, Ong didn't just take people, it unmade them. Stories of Ong were often used as cautionary tales. Children were told not to wander near the lake alone. Hunters left offerings at certain rocky outcroppings before ascending into the high ridges. There are even records of dances performed to ask Ong to look elsewhere during harsh seasons when the risk of being taken was said to increase. Some modern interpretations try to frame Ong as a thunderbird, a figure seen in multiple indigenous traditions across North America. But Ong is more specific, more targeted. Thunderbirds often represent power, storms, or divine justice. Ong doesn't bother with symbolism. It is said to live in a hidden eyrie high above Lake Tahoe's cliffs, rarely seen and never twice in the same spot. What's especially unsettling is that even today, stories persist. In the 1960s, a group of hikers reported seeing an enormous bird-like shadow pass over them near Emerald Bay. There was no sound, no wind, just a dark silhouette blotting out the sun, moving against the breeze. They assumed it was a plane until it flapped its wings. In 1987, a lone kayaker vanished near a steep, rocky section of the shoreline. The search team found his boat floating upright, intact, with all his gear still inside. No sign of a struggle, no body, just drag marks on the nearby sand, going upward toward a sheer cliff wall. Skeptics, of course, say it's all misidentification, large birds of prey, optical illusions, lake myths recycled over generations, but they never explain the eerie precision of the stories, or why the sightings tend to happen in the same secluded spots again and again. Always on days when the air is unnaturally still. And if Ong is the terror of the sky, the very concept of being watched from above, what happens when the powers from below decide to fight back? Because not all spirits are hunters, some are warriors, and their battles leave scars that never truly vanish, even if the mountain they fought over is now silent. 11. Skell. Mount Shasta isn't just a mountain. By now you've probably figured that out. It's a magnet for myths, a kind of sacred archive of the unexplained, where beings glow, vanish, or speak in frequencies only dreams understand. But before Lemurians in white robes or hikers with New Age crystal maps ever claimed it as their own, Mount Shasta already had legends, much older ones, the kind passed down in careful language. And at the heart of those stories stands Skell. Skell is not a cryptid in the usual sense. He doesn't leave tracks. He doesn't appear in shaky videos, but he's present, deeply present, in the air, in the rock, in the highlands between gusts of wind at the summit. He is described as a sky spirit, a protector, a creator being in the mythology of the Klamath people. Skell isn't just on the mountain. He descended onto it, literally. He came from the heavens and made his home at the peak, watching over the world below, not with passive reverence, but with intent. According to the Klamath, Skell did not arrive alone. He came because there was a threat, a rival being from the below world, a dark spirit known as Yao. Where Skell represented light, Yao brought fire and shadow. Their clash wasn't metaphorical, it was a cosmic war, and Mount Shasta was ground zero. The story goes that Skell and Yao fought violently over the fate of the world. Skell hurled burning rocks, some say stars, down upon his enemy. Yao responded with eruptions, smoke, and darkness. The battles were said to light up the sky for days, shaking the earth and boiling the lakes. Eventually, Skell triumphed, casting Yao back into the depths and sealing his power beneath the earth. But not without cost. The mountain was scarred, its snow turned gray, and the spirits of fire still flicker at its base. Now, here's where things get strange, geologically strange. Modern volcanologists will tell you that Mount Mazama, the collapsed volcano that formed Crater Lake in Oregon, not far north of Shasta, experienced a massive eruption thousands of years ago, one so violent it darkened skies for miles and reshaped the entire region. They'll also point out that Mount Shasta, too, is a volcano, technically dormant, but very much alive under the surface. Two sacred mountains, two ancient beings, one cataclysmic battle recorded both in stone and in story. Some researchers have tried to frame the legend of Skell and Yao as a mythologized record of a real volcanic event passed down orally over millennia. But others say that explanation is too easy because the stories don't just talk about lava and light, they talk about consciousness, about will, about spirits that burn brighter than physics and fight with purpose. To this day, some climbers report strange feelings on the mountain, not fear exactly, but awe mixed with alertness, as if something enormous and invisible still resides there, as if the war never really ended. And if Skell was a warrior spirit who came from above, then what kind of force could provoke a god to descend from the sky? And what happens when that force refuses to stay buried? 12. Yao, if Skell is the spirit of sky and order, then Yao is the opposite, not just in direction, but in temperament. Where Skell descended from above to protect, Yao rose from below to consume, a creature of fire, of smoke, of chaotic hunger. And if Mount Shasta holds echoes of Skell's light, then nearby Mount Mazama, now Crater Lake, holds the hollowed silence where Lao once burned. Yao is one of the most vividly fearsome beings in Klamath lore, not a metaphor, not a cautionary fable, a being with a name, a purpose, and a presence that once reshaped the land. He ruled the below world, a dark and fiery realm beneath the earth. According to legend, he fell in love with a mortal woman who lived atop the mountain. When she rejected him, Yao flew into a rage, not a tantrum, but an eruption. He burst from the ground, spewing fire and rock, trying to drag her and her people down into the underworld. Skell intervened, of course. Their war played out across the sky and earth. Yao from below, with fountains of flame, Skell from above, hurling bolts of light. Mountains cracked, the land burned. Eventually, Skell struck the final blow. He ripped the top off Mount Mazama and cast Yao back into the void. Then he collapsed the mountain on top of him, sealing him in a massive crater that would eventually fill with impossibly deep, impossibly blue water. That's Crater Lake. Today, it's a national park, peaceful, quiet, postcard perfect. But dive a little deeper, and the symbolism, and the strangeness resurfaces. The lake is one of the deepest in the world, nearly 2,000 feet at its lowest point. There are no inlets, no outlets. It collects only rain and snowmelt. By all accounts, it should be sterile, but it isn't. Life persists, barely. Some scientists still don't understand how certain species survive in its depths. Visibility underwater extends over 100 feet, an unnatural clarity, and always beneath it all is the sense of something being contained. Local indigenous communities still regard the lake as sacred and dangerous. Some elders say you shouldn't speak Yao's name near the water. Others refuse to look directly across the surface for too long. There are tales of people disappearing near its rim, of strange lights beneath the waves, of eerie winds that pick up without warning and carry voices you almost recognize. Scientists, of course, chalk it all up to geothermal anomalies, wind tunnels, natural gas emissions, but they don't explain why so many who visit feel the same thing, a kind of silence that isn't peaceful, a silence that feels watched. And while Skell may have sealed Yao beneath the mountain, legends say he was not destroyed, only buried. The crater is not a grave, it's a lid, a containment field, and someday, if the world forgets to be careful, that lid might crack. Because things that live beneath the earth don't like to stay forgotten, especially not when there are other spirits already stirring in the depths, younger, more playful, more deceptive, but no less dangerous, the ones who live in the lakes and whisper back when you call their names. 13. Water babies, lake spirits, Washoe lore. Beneath the glimmering blue waters of Lake Tahoe, beneath the postcards, the paddleboards, and the multi-million-dollar homes, something ancient waits. Not a monster exactly, not even a creature in the usual sense, more like a feeling with teeth, a story passed down for so long that it stopped being a story and started being a rule, a warning whispered not with fear, but with respect. The Washoe people call them water babies, though the name is misleading in the most unnerving way possible, because these aren't sweet or gentle spirits. They're not lost souls looking for peace. They're lake-bound entities that cry like infants, lure people to the water's edge, and don't always let them leave. According to Washoe oral tradition, the water babies are spirits of drowned children, sometimes intentionally drowned, sometimes stolen by the lake, sometimes something else. The stories vary, but the emotion behind them does not. These are not spirits you commune with. You don't pray to them or about them. You avoid them. You respect them. And above all, you don't speak their name near open water, because the moment you do, the stories say, they might hear you. The cries are the first thing. They're said to come at night when the wind is still and the water is calm, a high-pitched, unmistakable wail, not of an animal, not of a bird. It's always the same, a baby crying, sometimes close, sometimes far away, just out of reach. Some say the sound is so convincing it compels even the most rational person to go searching, just to make sure. That's how it starts. That's how it always starts. Then come the sightings, a shape in the water, a ripple with no source, a pale face half seen beneath the surface, staring straight upward with black, expressionless eyes. It's not always aggressive, not at first, but those who approach too close often report a sudden, inexplicable pull, a heaviness in their limbs, the sense that the lake wants to hold them there a little too long. Skeptics say it's hypothermia, cold water shock, underwater currents, but those explanations rarely account for the identical experiences across time, across generations, across people with no reason to lie. Some versions of the water babies legend are even darker. In these, they aren't the spirits of human children at all, but ancient aquatic beings that have always lived in the lake, merely imitating human sounds to lure in prey, not ghosts, but predators, not angry, but hungry. What's unsettling is how consistent these stories are, not just around Lake Tahoe, but in other Western lakes with deep indigenous histories. Pyramid Lake in Nevada, said by some to be connected underground to Tahoe, has its own water babies legends, nearly identical in tone and terror. Same cries, same vanishings, same silence afterward. Even today, modern drownings in these lakes often carry a strange eeriness. Victims are sometimes strong swimmers. Conditions are calm. Bodies are found days later in places already searched, as if something was reluctant to give them back. Maybe it's myth, maybe it's metaphor, but then again, maybe the oldest warnings are just the clearest ones. And if the lake holds spirits that steal voices, what do we make of the roaring thing that surfaced once, just once, along the rocky California coast, too massive to measure and too silent to name? 14. Giant dragon-like sea creature, Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz. The California coastline isn't exactly subtle. It crashes, it claws, it performs, and nowhere does it perform with more grandeur than Monterey Bay, a sweeping, storm-bitten crescent of ocean that has swallowed ships, confounded scientists, and coughed up more than its share of strange things. Whale songs echo from its depths. Great white sharks drift silently beneath the waves, but every so often, something else appears, something no one can quite identify. They call it the Monterey Sea Dragon, though that name is more poetic than precise. It's been described in multiple ways over the decades: a long, sinuous body with dorsal spines, a head like a horse or camel, thick, ridged skin the color of kelp. The common theme? It's big, not shark big, not whale big, big in a way that makes people question their own eyes, and frequently their own sanity. The first major report came in the late 1920s. A group of commercial fishermen near Santa Cruz claimed to see something enormous breach the water during a foggy morning run. At first, they thought it was a whale until they saw its head. It rose slowly like a submarine surfacing, but with a rolling motion more akin to a snake. The head was narrow, with bony ridges and two horn-like structures protruding from its crown. It hovered for a moment, long enough for 3 grown men to drop their nets and start praying, then sank without a sound. The ocean, they said, went completely still. Over the years, similar stories trickled in. A sailor in the 1950s spotted a massive, undulating shadow moving parallel to the shore, just beyond the surf line. A kayaker in the early 2000s reported a creature with a long neck and visible vertebrae surfacing about 50 yards from his boat. He paddled back to land without looking behind him once. "It wasn't just alive," he said later. "It noticed me." Marine biologists predictably roll their eyes. They chalk it up to misidentified oarfish, which can grow over 30 feet and have a serpentine, undulating swim pattern. Fair enough, until you realize most oarfish are deep-sea dwellers that rarely surface, let alone perform lazy S-curves just offshore, like they're giving a show. And then there's the depth. Monterey Bay plunges into a submarine canyon deeper than the Grand Canyon. The ocean floor drops off abruptly, creating a vast and largely unexplored trench that could easily conceal something larger than our worst guesses. Explorers with underwater drones have described vast shadows beyond their equipment's range. One team even lost signal for nearly 6 minutes after descending past a certain threshold, only to recover it abruptly with the equipment unharmed, but inexplicably relocated 100 feet from its original position. There's no solid proof, of course, just shaky footage, conflicting eyewitness accounts, and a lingering feeling that something very old still stirs beneath that cold blue surface. But legends aren't built on proof. They're built on the fear of what we almost understand. And if something scaled and silent glides through the ocean trenches, what might be crawling up from underneath our cities, not from the sea, but from below the streets, into the stories we tell, to keep ourselves distracted from what might be watching through the storm drains? 15. Lizard people, reptile men, SoCal legends. Los Angeles is built on layers, not just geologically, but spiritually. Beneath the palm trees and traffic reports lies a palimpsest of stories, each one half buried by the next. And at the bottom of that stack, deep under the asphalt and Art Deco, is one of California's strangest, most persistent myths. The lizard people of Los Angeles, not metaphorical lizard people, not shady politicians or pop star conspiracies. These are literal humanoid reptiles, cold-blooded, subterranean, and allegedly living in an ancient network of tunnels beneath the city. The legend sounds like science fiction, and yet it starts with a man holding a map and a pickaxe, convinced he'd found the entrance to a forgotten world. His name was G. Warren Shufelt. In 1934, he appeared in LA newspapers claiming he had discovered a system of caverns beneath downtown Los Angeles, stretching from modern-day Pershing Square to the base of the Santa Monica Mountains, using what he described as a radio X-ray device, which no one else could confirm or explain. Shufelt said he'd located large, man-made chambers buried hundreds of feet below the city. According to him, these chambers contained not only gold and ancient artifacts, but signs of a vanished civilization of reptilian beings. He wasn't vague either. Shufelt said the tunnels had been carved over 5,000 years ago by a race of advanced, lizard-like people who fled a global cataclysm and built a subterranean city to preserve their culture. According to his diagrams, the layout resembled a lizard itself, with its head beneath what is now the Los Angeles Central Library, an ironic touch considering how many stories people still try to bury there. Naturally, most wrote him off as delusional. Even the LA Times treated the story with more curiosity than belief. But Shufelt wasn't alone. He had backing, permits, and a team ready to start digging. They bored shafts into the earth for weeks. And then suddenly the project vanished. No formal explanation, no completed tunnel, just silence. Shufelt disappeared from the headlines, and the city moved on. But the legend didn't. Over the years, stories have resurfaced. Construction workers report odd tunnels not on any city blueprints. Urban explorers claim to have found bricked-off passageways leading nowhere, or somewhere. The smell of sulfur, the sudden drop in temperature, graffiti warning people not to go further, and always the feeling of being followed. Eyewitnesses, rare but consistent, describe humanoid figures seen briefly in dim, underground spaces. Tall, thin, greenish-gray skin, long fingers, eyes like polished stone. They're never close, never lingering, just watching, and then gone. Skeptics say it's urban myth meets gas leak, a mixture of Schufelt's eccentricity and the human brain's need to fill in the shadows. But the story persists, partly because it's too detailed to ignore, and partly because Los Angeles is a city built on fantasy and secrets. After all, what better place for something to hide than underneath a city that never stops looking up? And if cold-blooded things truly slither beneath our feet, maybe it makes sense that the skies above Southern California aren't empty either, especially when wings the size of nightmares have already been spotted gliding over its canyons. 16. Winged Demons, SoCal Legends. Southern California is better known for its sun than its shadows, but there are shadows. They just move differently here, up in the hills above Los Angeles, in the canyons, on the ridge lines, along the jagged silhouettes that separate city lights from desert dark. Something flies, not birds, not bats, not anything you'd want to follow. The old stories just call them winged demons, and even the ones who don't believe in them seem to feel them. They don't land, they don't linger, but they're seen, and always just long enough to ruin sleep for a few weeks. Reports of winged humanoid creatures stretch back to the early 20th century, before the freeways, before the movie studios, when Los Angeles was still mostly dirt roads and citrus trees. Ranchers and drifters told tales of massive, bat-like figures swooping silently over the hills, blocking out stars as they passed, usually at twilight, always without warning. The wingspans varied. Some said 12 feet, others closer to 20. One man described it as a hang glider made of bones, but the details aren't always physical. Many descriptions are emotional first. An unnatural silence, an oppressive pressure in the chest, the feeling that something massive is about to arrive, and then it does, but in silence. The creature is usually silhouetted, its wings leathery or featherless, its movement more like gliding than flying, no flapping, no effort, just a steady, intelligent drift above the landscape, as if surveying something that once belonged to it. The sightings cluster in specific places: Topanga Canyon, Malibu Creek, the Angeles National Forest, shadowed areas on the edge of human sprawl, not deep wilderness, but not quite suburbs either, places where a shape can hide in plain sight. Hikers report spotting figures perched on high outcroppings, their proportions vaguely human, but wrong, too tall, too still. When approached, they vanish. Not fly away, vanish. Some claim the creatures are harbingers, that they appear before wildfires, earthquakes, or sudden deaths. A few even connect them with ancient spirits from Tongva or Chumash traditions, sky beings that once punished human arrogance by descending to the earth in winged form. Others lean modern, calling them alien scouts or interdimensional observers, only visible when the air thins enough to let them slip through. Skeptics argue for misidentified birds of prey, drones, or camera glitches, but the emotional charge of the sightings tends to undercut that. These aren't just vague blurs in the sky. Witnesses speak with clarity and, more importantly, reluctance. Most don't want to talk about it. They're not looking for attention. They're looking for a way to unsee what they saw. And then there's the noise, or the lack of it. One recurring detail in these encounters is total silence. No insects, no birds, no city sounds. It's as if the air itself goes still to make room for something that shouldn't be here. The legends remained underground, literally and figuratively, passed in hushed tones in late night forums. But if something is gliding silently above the canyons, what else could be sliding silently below the surface of the Pacific? Especially when mariners from long ago have already drawn the outlines of something coiled, scaled, and always just out of reach. 17. Sea serpents. There's something deeply impersonal about the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't rage like the Atlantic or glitter like the Mediterranean. It doesn't make a show of itself. It just is, vast, cold, and relentlessly indifferent. Along the Southern California coast, the sea hums with traffic, surfers, shipping freighters, fishing boats, jet skis. But out beyond the kelp forests, where the seafloor drops off into continental nothingness, the stories begin. The old mariners called them sea serpents, long, sinuous, scaled, serpent-like creatures that weren't whales, weren't fish, and definitely weren't just big eels. The term was vague on purpose. Serpent covers a lot. It doesn't pretend to understand. It simply names the movement, the rise and fall of a ridge-backed body sliding beneath the surface without a ripple. The earliest documented reports off the California coast go back to the 1800s. Sailors heading north from San Diego would describe seeing something massive pacing their ships at a distance, not swimming like a dolphin, but rolling like a rope dragged through water. It wasn't fast. It didn't need to be. One captain wrote in his journal, "It kept pace with us for nearly an hour. I never saw its head, only the back, rising and sinking like the coils of a slow tide." Locals along the central and southern coast began adding their own stories. A Santa Barbara fisherman claimed to see one breach the surface, revealing a crest of jagged fins that shimmered green under the sun. He refused to return to sea after that, said it wasn't just the size that unsettled him, it was the stillness. "It looked like it was thinking," he told a reporter in 1911. Since then, the sightings have been sporadic but consistent. In the 1930s, tourists in Laguna Beach reported a creature surfacing between the shore and Catalina Island, described as a snake with shoulders, which raises more questions than it answers. In the 1950s, a surfer near Ventura claimed to have been followed by something long, gray, and eel-like for over a mile. He paddled to shore and never surfed again. Then there's the Catalina Channel, a 3,000-foot deep trench between the mainland and the island, often cited in naval reports as a sonar dead zone. Submariners have reported anomalous shapes moving through the channel, too large and too fast to be submarines or whales, unidentified, unverified, but repeatedly logged. Skeptics blame oarfish again, the same fallback creature offered for any elongated mystery in the sea. And sure, oarfish do get big, up to 30 feet or more. They are long and rare and move like living ribbons. But oarfish don't rise above the water. They don't keep pace with boats. They don't watch you. There's an oddly clinical tone to many sea serpent reports, not fear necessarily, more like quiet confusion. Witnesses don't usually scream or panic. They stare, frozen, as if some instinct in the brain knows that whatever they're seeing isn't attacking, it's evaluating, which in some ways is worse. And if something scaled and ancient still winds through the trench between shore and sea, we might ask what happens when the creature chooses to step out of the water, walks upright, snarling, into the mountain towns and pine forests we thought were safe, because the next one does just that, and it's rumored to call Idlewild home. 18. Ildebeest, Idlewild area. Idlewild is the kind of mountain town that feels like a movie set. Pine-covered ridges, quiet cabins, and a population that treats the woods like a second living room. It's beautiful in that curated, too good to be true way, which is usually the first sign that something is off, because nestled within the San Jacinto Mountains, just high enough to escape the Southern California sprawl and low enough to avoid snowbound obscurity, lurks a creature locals don't really like to talk about. They call it the Ildebeest. It's not officially in the cryptozoology guidebooks, but the legend has been growing in the backwoods and back alleys of Idlewild for decades. Some say it's just another regional Bigfoot variant. Others insist it's something older, stranger, a shapeshifter, a spirit, or maybe even a hybrid of the two. Descriptions vary, but not wildly. That's part of what makes the story so compelling. The creature is said to stand roughly 7 feet tall with thick matted fur that's more moss-colored than brown. Some say it reeks of wet stone and rotting wood, not decay exactly, but that deep, earthy scent of something that's lived underground too long. It moves on 2 legs, but can drop to 4 when stalking. Its eyes, not glowing red, not demonic, just reflective, like a deer's, which somehow makes it worse. The Ildebeest is said to haunt the trails that run just beyond the edge of town, the ones that aren't maintained by park services, the ones you only find if you already know they're there. Hikers have reported the usual signs: strange howls at night, claw marks on tree trunks too high for bears, and footprints left in places too remote for casual pranksters. But the more disturbing stories come from locals, the people who've lived in Idlewild long enough to stop using GPS and start paying attention to the old warnings. One family reported finding a deer carcass near their cabin, untouched, except for the head, which was missing, no signs of a struggle, no blood, just gone. Another resident, a retired forest ranger, said he once spotted a dark figure crouching beside a creek, lapping at the water like an animal. When he raised his flashlight, it stood up and then vanished, not ran, just gone between one blink and the next. Some theories go folkloric. They say the Ildebeest is a guardian spirit of the mountain, awakened when the land is disrespected. Others lean toward the scientific fringe, a relic hominid surviving in isolated pockets, smart enough to evade detection, but territorial enough to defend its ground. A few of the more speculative types suggest the creature is drawn to electromagnetic fields, and if that sounds silly, it's worth noting that this region sits along multiple fault lines, areas where strange energy spikes have been recorded for decades. Skeptics dismiss it as a mix of bear sightings, hallucinations, and folklore. But there's a reason people in Idlewild don't camp alone, a reason local guides carry more than just bear spray, a reason why, when you walk the town after dark, you'll notice porch lights always stay on, even in the dead of night, even when no one's home, because whatever the ildy beast is, it doesn't stay deep in the forest. It wanders, it learns, and according to some, it remembers faces. But as terrifying as a forest dwelling predator might be, there's something even more unnerving, a creature that leaves no tracks, no bite marks, no noise, just a trail of bloodless livestock and unanswered questions, the kind of destruction that whispers instead of roars. And in California, they say it has a name. 19. Chupacabra. The goats started disappearing first. It always begins the same way. A torn open pen, a frantic animal count, a few wide-eyed livestock owners insisting they were just here last night. Then come the bodies, not torn apart, not devoured, just drained. That's the word that keeps showing up in the reports. Drained. No blood, no mess, just a cold, surgical kind of aftermath, like something took exactly what it came for and left the rest as a warning. Enter the chupacabra, a name that translates roughly to goat sucker, which might sound ridiculous until you see what's left behind. Though most famously associated with Puerto Rico and Latin American folklore, the chupacabra has steadily crept northward over the years, finding footholds in places no one expected. And yes, California is one of them. At first glance, the chupacabra seems like the outlier on a list of West Coast monsters. It didn't originate here. It has no roots in native Californian lore. But then again, neither did a lot of California's residents. Legends migrate just like people, and this one hitched a ride with eerie precision. The earliest California sightings began popping up in the late 90s, primarily in the southern agricultural regions, Imperial Valley, inland San Diego County, parts of Fresno. Farmers would wake to find their chickens dead with no visible wounds, or goats lying still with two precise puncture marks at the neck. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just the kind of silence that feels intentional. Descriptions of the creature vary wildly, depending on who you ask and how much sleep they've lost. Some say it resembles a reptilian kangaroo with leathery green-gray skin, glowing eyes, and spines running down its back. Others describe something more canine, hairless with scabbed skin and long fangs, often mistaken for a mangy coyote, until it does something no coyote should be able to do, like leap a 10-foot fence without a sound. In the early 2000s, reports clustered around Riverside County, where a series of nighttime livestock killings stumped both veterinarians and animal control officers. One incident in Hemet involved 3 sheep found in perfect formation, each with the same clean incisions and not a drop of blood left. Surveillance cameras showed nothing, just static at the precise window of time the attack would have occurred. Explanations range from wild to clinical. Some zoologists suggest mange-afflicted coyotes or foxes are to blame, weakened by disease and behaving erratically. But that doesn't account for the total blood loss, or the lack of scavenging, or why local predators won't go near the bodies afterward. Conspiracy theorists offer something else entirely, a bioengineered creature designed to test human reaction to a predator that doesn't belong, an escaped experiment or a test run. A few even claim the chupacabra is sentient, hunting not out of instinct, but preference. Whatever it is, it doesn't linger. It appears, it feeds, and it vanishes, often for years at a time. But when it returns, it always picks up where it left off, as if it never really left, as if it's been watching, waiting for the moment. No one's paying attention. And if bloodless carcasses and vanishing predators weren't enough, consider this. What if the thing stalking you wasn't a beast at all, but someone you already know, or used to know, or thought you knew, until it showed up again years later at the foot of your bed, wearing a face borrowed from the dead. 20. Ghost haunted figures, e.g., Niles Hotel ghost. California is full of haunted places. That's not unusual. But what is unusual is how many of them are haunted by the same kind of thing, not wailing banshees or headless horsemen, but something quieter, stranger, a specific kind of figure that doesn't scream or slam doors, but simply appears just long enough to turn certainty into doubt. Some call them ghosts, others call them echoes, but whatever they are, they keep showing up in the margins, especially in places like the Niles Hotel. You won't find the Niles on the cover of ghost hunter magazines or on the top 10 list of haunted locations in America. And that's exactly why it's terrifying, because the stories about it don't come from YouTubers or midnight daredevils. They come from staff, from travelers, from the kind of people who don't believe in this sort of thing until it's standing right in front of them. Located in Alturas, a small, out-of-the-way town in Modoc County, the Niles Hotel has stood since 1908. It's seen fires, floods, gunfights, and decades of slow-motion abandonment, and through it all, people keep reporting the same thing. Figures, human-shaped, shadowed, sometimes in mirrors, sometimes in hallways, sometimes standing perfectly still at the foot of the bed, not attacking, not even moving, just there. One former guest recalled checking in late, finding the lobby empty, and heading up the stairs to her room. As she reached the landing, she saw a woman in old-fashioned clothing walk past the hallway and disappear into what looked like a broom closet. When she checked the door, nothing, just a blank wall. Later, she asked the front desk clerk if there was some kind of reenactment happening. The clerk reportedly paused, then said, "That's just the lady in the blue dress. She comes and goes. And she's not the only one. There's also the man in the bowler hat, seen on the third floor, usually near the window. He doesn't move, doesn't acknowledge anyone. He simply stares out as if watching something long gone. And occasionally, guests in nearby rooms complain of cold drafts, missing items, or waking up in the night to see a figure standing just outside their doorway, not entering, just waiting." Skeptics attribute these sightings to sleep paralysis, suggestive architecture, or good old-fashioned storytelling. But if that's the case, why are the reports so consistent? Why do people who've never heard the stories describe the same clothing, the same faces, the same silence? And it's not just the Niles Hotel. These haunted figures show up all over the state, in abandoned mining towns, decommissioned naval bases, even modern apartment buildings thrown up in a hurry, places where something happened, something no one quite understood or wanted to. Some folklorists believe these are not ghosts in the traditional sense, but place memories, emotional imprints burned into reality, like a song stuck on a loop, playing just loud enough for the right kind of listener to hear. But others say they're more than that. They say the figures know they're being seen, that the glance you catch in the corner of your eye isn't random. It's a test, a response, a mirror held up to your fear to see how much you're willing to ignore. Because when a ghost isn't trying to scare you, when it's just standing there, calm, still, aware, the question becomes, what does it want? And if these silent watchers haunt the places we sleep, what happens when something takes flight in full daylight over cities and highways with wings wide enough to blot out the sky and eyes that follow you home? 21. Sacramento Mothman, a flying creature. Sacramento is not the kind of city where you'd expect to find a monster with wings. It's a government town. Tidy, bureaucratic, allergic to chaos. It runs on paperwork and by not paranormal headlines. And yet, beginning in the 1980s and intensifying into the early 2000s, something started to ripple just outside the margins of its well-drawn grid. Sightings of a giant, flying creature large enough to block out streetlights, silent enough to make you question if you saw anything at all. People call it the Sacramento Mothman. though that's more of a borrowed title than an official name. It shares traits with the original West Virginia legend: red eyes, massive wingspan, a tendency to show up before disaster, but it doesn't behave the same. It's less theatrical, more elusive, not an omen exactly, more like a reminder that not everything above us is made of jet engines and weather balloons. The first credible report came from a retired air traffic controller in 1983. He'd stepped outside to smoke during a night shift near McClellan Airfield when he saw something glide over the hangars. At first, he assumed it was a bird, then it passed beneath a floodlight. He estimated the wingspan at over 15 feet. It moved like a manta ray, he later said, but in the air and absolutely silent. He never reported it officially. Others, however, did. Over the next 2 decades, scattered sightings emerged along the I-5 corridor, in Elk Grove, Rancho Cordova, and even in the heart of Sacramento itself, always at night, always with the same eerie quiet. Witnesses described it as dark gray or black, with leathery wings that looked too thin to support its size. Some said it had glowing eyes. Others said its face was blank. A few swore it didn't flap its wings at all, just floated, as if pushed by some unseen current. Skeptics blame owls, or misidentified drones, or trick lighting on low-hanging clouds. But what drone moves without sound or blinking lights? What owl hovers motionless over a freeway for 30 seconds, then vanishes straight upward? Then there's the behavior. People who've seen the creature often describe a deep, immediate unease, not panic, but a kind of internal stillness, like their body knew something was wrong before their mind caught up. One man said he was driving across the Tower Bridge when he saw it land on top of a nearby building. He pulled over, got out to take a picture, and watched it look directly at him, not in the general direction, at him. The photo he took was blurry. Of course it was. They always are. Local lore has attempted to connect the creature to the original Mothman of Point Pleasant, which, as you may know, was linked by some to the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967. But no major disasters have followed Sacramento sightings. Not exactly, just small things. A gas line explosion, a downtown blackout, a bridge fire. Nothing on its own worth connecting, unless you want to see the pattern. Some say it's a protector, others call it a warning. A few believe it's not one creature at all, but a species, something that's always been here, slipping in and out of view when the sky is just dark enough and the watchers just distracted enough. But if the skies are home to winged enigmas, what do we make of the ones that walk with unnatural legs? Because not everything strange soars. Some of it stalks on tripods of muscle and bone through California's forgotten foothills, where old legends still limp across lonely trails. 22. The tripod beast, Tripodero variant. You've heard of the Tripodero, the bizarre three-legged creature of California folklore that lurches across foothills with the grace of malfunctioning machinery. But what most people don't realize is this: the legend has variants, and like any good mutation, these variants are stranger, leaner, and arguably more menacing than the original. Out in the borderlands where suburbia crumbles into forest, in the overlooked gullies between the Sierras and the valley floor, there are whispered stories of a tripod beast that's less comical folklore and more predator. The classic Tripodero, you might recall, is an oddball from the 19th century lumberjack storytelling tradition, a creature with a pipe-like snout and telescoping legs, sometimes said to shoot rocks at prey using compressed air. Weird, yes, but this version, the one described in recent decades by hikers, surveyors, and hunters, drops the cartoon logic and replaces it with something cold and silent, something biomechanical in its gait and wrong in its proportions. Witnesses report seeing a creature with 3 jointed legs, not like a tripod constructed, but like one grown. Each leg moves independently with slow, deliberate precision, as if it's not walking, but calibrating. The body, when visible, is small and hunchbacked, sitting like a pod above the legs, covered in mottled gray-brown skin or chitin, no visible eyes, no discernible head, just a central mass, and limbs that move like a piece of broken time-lapse footage. One reported encounter occurred near the Stanislaus National Forest in 2009. A group of geology students had set up camp for a weekend field study. Around 2 a.m., they heard a rhythmic clicking sound, not like an animal call, but like mechanical tapping on stone. When they stepped out of their tents, they saw it. Three legs, each ending in a sharp, narrow point, moving slowly along the ridge above their camp. No arms, no sound beyond the clicks. They watched in frozen silence as it disappeared behind a cluster of boulders. One of them said it felt like being observed by a camera, not prey, not enemy, just a subject. A hunter near Grass Valley reported something similar in 2017. He was following a deer trail when he noticed a strange pattern of indentations in the dirt, triangular, deep, and spaced too far apart for any known animal. As he followed the trail, he found a section of brush completely flattened, not like something had passed through, but like it had waited there. He didn't stay long enough to see what came back. Speculation ranges from the absurd to the academic. Is it an alien probe, a government prototype that slipped its leash, a desert-adapted species of arthropod we've never officially acknowledged? Or, and this is the theory most locals won't say out loud, is it leftover, a remnant of something once hunted to near extinction, now slowly reclaiming territory? Skeptics insist it's all misidentification. Cranes, construction equipment glimpsed through trees, tall tales revived in internet forums. But there's a reason the legend has evolved, a reason the name has changed from Tripodero, the lumberjack's joke, to tripod beast, because this version doesn't make noise, doesn't fire rocks, it doesn't announce itself at all. It waits. And while it stalks the outer edges of civilization, there's something even deeper in the soil, a species not confined to forest or field, but embedded in the very mythology of Los Angeles, where the real monsters never really left, they just moved underground. 23. Reptile Men. LA reptoids. Beneath Los Angeles, beneath the boulevards, beneath the mansions, beneath the subway lines and parking garages, lies a city no one talks about. Not the historic tunnels or Prohibition-era speakeasies, not the storm drains that swallow runoff and occasionally rumors. We're talking deeper, older, stranger, a place mapped not with GPS, but with stories. Because if you ask the right people, or the wrong ones, they'll tell you there are reptile men living under LA, also known as reptoids. These creatures occupy one of the most persistent and unsettling cryptid-adjacent legends in California folklore. Unlike traditional monsters, they don't appear out of nowhere, snarling and misunderstood. They've been here, quietly, intentionally, for centuries, possibly longer. The myth took root publicly in 1934, when a mining engineer named G. Warren Shufelt announced to the Los Angeles Times that he had discovered a network of ancient subterranean tunnels beneath downtown LA. He wasn't looking for monsters. He was searching for lost treasure, specifically hoards of gold allegedly buried by a prehistoric civilization. What he claimed to find instead was a vast underground city shaped like a lizard, complete with chambers and sealed vaults. And yes, he meant that literally. He believed that a reptilian race had once inhabited this area, surviving a global cataclysm by building beneath what would one day become the city of Los Angeles. Shufelt even produced elaborate radio X-ray maps of the tunnels, diagrams so detailed they looked more like engineering blueprints than myths. He and a small crew began drilling. He claimed success, and then, as quickly as it had surfaced, the project disappeared. No gold, no tunnels, no follow-up, just silence, which naturally only made the story grow. Modern urban explorers and amateur cryptozoologists have expanded the legend far beyond its origins. According to them, the reptoids never left. They still live below, not in ruins, but in active chambers. They're described as humanoid, but cold-blooded, with scaly skin, vertical slit pupils, and a preference for low light and silence. They're not chaotic or savage. They're planners, engineers, observers. Reports from those who claim to have encountered one, and yes, there are a few, describe an intense feeling of paralysis or disorientation, a sort of mental static that descends in their presence, as though your thoughts aren't entirely your own. Witnesses often describe seeing a shape in the tunnels or storm drains, tall, bipedal, with long limbs and inhuman posture. Sometimes the eyes glow faintly green. Sometimes they don't glow at all, but reflect light in that animal way, like polished glass catching fire. Skeptics chalk the whole thing up to misidentified animals, overactive imaginations, or the ever-reliable California blend of sleep deprivation and psychotropic inspiration. And sure, storm drains do echo, shadows do stretch, and Hollywood has always been the perfect host for the surreal. But that doesn't explain the city workers who've refused to go back into certain tunnels, or the people who say their compasses and phones stop working in specific drainage basins near Griffith Park, or the fact that multiple historic accounts, years apart, describe the same impossible thing: a scaly figure standing just beyond the range of the flashlight, watching, not attacking, not running, just waiting. And while the reptoids may rule the underground, not all watchers are so quiet, because some beasts don't hide in tunnels or caves. Some perch on rooftops, claws gripping stone, wings curled like cloaks, ready to leap into your nightmares the second you look up. 24. Winged demon, one gargoyle-type beasts. It's easy to think of gargoyles as decoration, Gothic leftovers clinging to old buildings, staring out with stony indifference over cities that outgrew them. But California, famously devoid of medieval architecture, has no real business with gargoyles, and yet for decades, people across Southern California have reported seeing something that resembles them: winged, humanoid figures perched on rooftops, ridge lines, and the ledges of remote canyons. They're not statues, they're not stationary, and they're not supposed to move, but they do. These aren't your theatrical, spire-crawling monsters from European folklore. These figures don't leer from churches or cathedrals. They appear on stucco apartments in San Bernardino, on highway overpasses near Riverside, on isolated cliff edges above the Inland Empire, where the sky goes flat and the cell signal dies. Locals call them a lot of things: winged demons, stone men, gargoyle beasts, but the descriptions share unnerving consistency: a humanoid body, wings folded tight against the back, skin like slate or ash, and eyes that glow. Not bright, not cinematic, but wrong, like headlights in a dream. The sightings often begin the same way: someone walking home at night, a parked car beneath a dim streetlight, the feeling of being watched, a glance upward, then a shape still crouched, coiled like it's deciding something, and then it disappears, not in a dramatic flap of wings, but in a single movement, gone, as if it had never been there. But the unease lingers, the sense that it could come back, that it saw you first. In 1994, a security guard in East Los Angeles claimed he witnessed a gargoyle-like thing land on the roof of a warehouse during his night shift. He described it as standing over 7 feet tall, with legs that bent backward and wings that looked too small to work. It reportedly crouched, leapt off the building, and vanished into the air. He refused to return to that post. No one believed him, of course, not officially. But a few weeks later, another guard refused to work the same shift, said he heard heavy feet on the roof, said he never saw what made the sound. Similar stories have popped up in remote parts of the Angeles National Forest and even the urban sprawl around Burbank and Glendale. One hiker near Mount Baldy said he watched a dark shape launch from a ridgeline and glide silently overhead, low enough to rustle the trees, large enough to blot out stars. He described it as muscular, but with wings that didn't belong to any known bird or bat. It looked like a sculpture that had come to life, he said, only angrier. Skeptics, of course, blame large owls, optical illusions, even hallucinations caused by dehydration or fear, but owls don't perch motionless on the edge of 20-story buildings, and they don't vanish without a sound. One prevailing theory, and it's an uncomfortable one, is that these creatures aren't natural at all, that they aren't alive in the biological sense, but instead animated by something else, something old, perhaps stone that moves only when unobserved, perhaps a relic of a forgotten culture, or maybe, as some suggest, a byproduct of belief itself. The more we imagine them, the more real they become. And if that's true, what happens when belief spreads? When shadow figures leave the rooftops and step into the rooms we thought were safe? Because sometimes the monsters don't need wings. Sometimes they come as shadows, silent, featureless, and already inside the house. 25. Shadow people, night shadows. You don't see them at first. That's the trick. You notice them after the hallway's gone quiet, after the lights flicker for just a second too long, after you swear you heard a footstep that didn't belong to anyone you live with. That's when you turn. Not because you heard something move, but because your body already knows something is there. And then, in the corner, just at the edge of where your vision ends and the unknown begins, you see it. A shadow standing where a shadow shouldn't be. California has no shortage of ghost stories, but shadow people are a category unto themselves. Not ghosts, not creatures, not hallucinations, something else, something in between. They show up in haunted hotels, abandoned hospitals, remote cabins, suburban hallways, and cheap motels off forgotten highways. Always humanoid, always blacker than the dark they stand in, always gone when you try to really look. And for some reason, they love California. From the desert outskirts of Barstow to the fog-soaked corridors of old Victorian homes in San Francisco, people keep reporting the same thing: a tall, human-shaped shadow that moves without sound or weight, slipping across walls and thresholds like smoke-given structure. Often the figure is described as having no face, just a void where a face should be. No eyes, no mouth, just presence. One particularly chilling report came from a woman staying at a short-term rental in Vallejo. She was unpacking in the bedroom when she noticed something in the full-length mirror, a man standing in the hallway behind her. She turned, nothing, but when she looked back at the mirror, he was still there, tall, thin, featureless, watching. She left the house within the hour. When she mentioned it to the property manager, they said, "You saw the shadow too, huh?" In the Central Valley, a retired trucker described pulling over late at night on a side road outside Bakersfield. He saw a figure cross in front of his headlights, except it didn't reflect light. It didn't cast a shadow. It was a shadow. It looked like it didn't belong in this dimension, he said, like it was bleeding through. There are countless stories like these, and despite the variation in locations, they follow a consistent pattern. The figure appears at night, usually in places of high emotional residue. It is silent and still, but radiates a sense of dread or oppression. It vanishes the moment you try to confront it directly, and most disturbingly, people often see it again, sometimes days later, sometimes across the state, as if it follows. Skeptics write it off as sleep paralysis, stress, or tricks of the light. The brain misfiring in moments of fatigue. And yes, that explains a lot, but not all. Not the reports from people fully awake, not the ones that appear on camera just for a frame or two. not the accounts from children who describe the exact same figure without ever hearing the stories. Some believe shadow people are interdimensional beings. Others think they are psychic projections, the embodiment of trauma or fear, coalescing in physical space. A few theories are more occult, that these entities feed on attention, that noticing them is a form of invitation, which raises a question. If all it takes is looking, what happens once they look back? And if shadows can learn to stand upright and watch us from the corners, what about those said to live beneath the earth itself? Giants of impossible scale, buried in catacombs, waiting in silence beneath the scorched floor of Death Valley. 26. Underworld Giants. Death Valley Catacombs Giants. Death Valley is named exactly how it feels, like a place Earth built for endings. Temperatures break thermometers, mountains rise like rusted bones. Time out there has no meaning, and yet people still go. Prospectors, wanderers, thrill seekers, mystics. Some come back changed, some don't come back at all. According to one of California's strangest and most persistent legends, it's not the heat that swallows them, it's what lives beneath. Hidden under the scorched surface of Death Valley, beneath the salt flats and abandoned mining claims, are said to be vast catacombs, not tunnels carved by machines, but by hands, and not human hands either. The story goes that deep within these underground chambers are the remains of an ancient race, giants over 8 feet tall, humanoid but strange. Some accounts claim they're skeletal, others say they're preserved, still dressed in odd metallic clothing, surrounded by technology no one recognizes. But the one constant in every version, size. These are not metaphorical giants, they're literal. The legend took shape in the 1930s when two men, a prospector named White and his partner, reportedly a Paiute guide, claimed to have discovered an entrance into a hidden cave system near Wingate Pass. They described vast rooms supported by arched columns, walls lined with hieroglyphs, and massive stone benches shaped for bodies much larger than any known human. They even claimed to find mummified remains, humanoid in form, but much taller, and with skulls elongated beyond normal proportions. White returned to the surface, intending to document everything, but when he came back with a small team, he couldn't find the entrance again, as if the mountain had sealed itself, or as if it was never supposed to be found a second time. The story, of course, was dismissed, brushed off as tall tale and desert madness. But oddly, it wasn't unique. The Paiute themselves have older stories of Site-Kas, a red-haired race of cannibalistic giants who were eventually wiped out by native tribes and driven into caves. Some of those caves have been found. Some weren't empty. In 1947, a newspaper out of San Diego ran a story about a pilot who spotted what he believed to be a strange rectangular opening in the cliffs of the Panamint Mountains. When hikers attempted to reach it weeks later, they found nothing but a sheer wall of rock. Still, rumors continued of missing hikers, of seismic anomalies in the valley floor, of military activity in areas not listed on any map. Modern skeptics, and there are many, argue the entire tale is a conflation of local myth, desert illusions, and apocryphal mining lore. They're probably right from a technical standpoint, but that doesn't explain the bone fragments some claim to have unearthed, or why hikers occasionally report hearing a deep, echoing hum beneath the rock. Not machinery, but something slower, older, like breathing. It's not just Death Valley either. Throughout the Southwest, stories of underground giants, buried cities, and forbidden caves are whispered with a curious blend of awe and dread. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe we've just gotten really good at paving over the things we don't want to remember. And if there really are giants under the sands, waiting in hollowed out cathedrals of stone, then we have to wonder what else moves through the desert unseen, not ancient but present. walking at dusk, faceless and silent, too thin for reason and too dark for light to touch. 27. Specter wraiths, dark figures in remote desert. The desert doesn't hide things, it exposes them, leaves them out under the brutal sun and dares you to notice. It's a place of wide open space and thin air, where distance warps and shadows stretch far longer than they should, and somewhere in those long, dry silences, in the dust-blown washes and dead stretches of the Mojave, something walks, something tall, dark, and terribly quiet. Locals call them specter wraiths, or sometimes just the dark figures. They're not your classic ghosts, no chains, no moaning, no unfinished business. They don't float, and they're never translucent. If anything, they're too solid, solid in a way that makes no sense, like someone cut a human silhouette out of the landscape and forgot to add details. No face, no clothes, no features, just blackness in the shape of a man, walking where no man should be. The stories come mostly from hikers, off-grid campers, and utility workers, people with no reason to invent anything, and even less interest in repeating it. One lineman working a remote site outside 29 Palms reported seeing a tall, dark figure moving across the desert floor, not walking exactly, but gliding. He said it moved against the wind, kicking up no dust, casting no visible shadow despite the sun. When he turned to call for his partner, the figure vanished, but the feeling, the heaviness, stayed for the rest of the day. Another account comes from a photographer doing night shots near the Kelso Dunes. He was alone, miles from the nearest road. While reviewing his long exposures, he noticed something strange. In frame after frame, a black, human-shaped blur appeared, standing farther off in each photo, as if it was walking away. But he hadn't seen anything with his eyes, just in the camera, just on playback. Specter wraiths are often spotted at twilight or just before dawn, those liminal hours when color fades and the world looks half-finished. Some witnesses describe seeing the figure standing still for long periods, facing away as if listening for something behind them. Others say they move only when unobserved, that if you blink, or worse, turn your back, they get closer. Skeptics call them mirages. The desert, after all, is a master of illusion. Temperature differentials bend light, distance plays tricks, exhaustion makes everything worse. But that doesn't explain the footprints, perfect human-shaped prints in the sand where no one should have been, or the moments when electronics fail, compasses spin, and your own sense of direction seems to dissolve in the dry heat. Some believe these figures are guardians of the desert, not protectors but wardens, echoes of something that once lived there, or worse, still does. Others suggest they're connected to ancient burial grounds, indigenous warning sites, or electromagnetic anomalies deep in the Mojave bedrock. A few insist they're travelers from somewhere else entirely, not ghosts, not demons, but observers studying the boundary between presence and absence. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is the simplest, that they are the desert itself, given shape and motive, that the land grew tired of being forgotten and sent shadows to follow us home. And if the desert can produce watchers that walk on two legs, faceless and voiceless, what does it release when it's angry? What ancient thing might rise when the ground cracks open, glowing, molten, older than myth, born of fire and never truly asleep? 28. Devils, fire spirits, in volcanic zones. In Northern California, the land breathes, and sometimes it breathes fire. The volcanoes don't look like volcanoes at first. They're draped in forest, softened by snow, softened further by time. But underneath that serene surface is pressure, reshiming, steam, magma, movement, the earth flexing its old muscles. And in the cracks between those movements, something flickers. Not lava, not gas, fire spirits, devils, old things that were never meant to cool. These entities aren't given names in official geological surveys, but they've been whispered about for centuries, especially around Mount Shasta, Lassen Peak, and the hot springs of the Modoc Plateau. According to both indigenous lore and local settler stories, these volcanic regions are more than just tectonic leftovers. They're thresholds, places where the veil thins, where spirits made of heat, smoke, and flickering orange light still slip through. The Akomawi and Atsugewi people who lived around the Lassen region believed in beings who lived beneath the mountains, not in metaphor, but in geography. These fire beings were not evil necessarily, but they were dangerous, powerful, older than humans, and only occasionally interested in them. They could bring warmth, but they could also take it away. Their appearances were rare, but unmistakable: red eyes and steam, dancing forms and smoke, and voices carried by the hiss of geysers. In more modern accounts, hikers and campers near geothermal vents have reported figures moving through the mist, too tall to be smoke, too shaped to be coincidence. One park ranger near Bumpass Hell, yes, that's a real place, claimed to see a man made entirely of flickering orange light step across a boiling pool without leaving a trace. When he blinked, the figure was gone, but the water, he swore, hissed louder, as if something had just exhaled. Other witnesses described glowing footprints left in ash, a sudden rise in temperature, followed by the sound of distant laughter, not joyful, but sharp, dry, like kindling catching flame. Skeptics say these are just natural illusions, heat distortion, volcanic gas affecting perception, and certainly those areas are scientifically volatile. Fumaroles release sulfur, seismic activity causes tremors, and the shifting pressure can mess with equilibrium. But that doesn't explain why the reports are so similar, often word for word, across time and culture. Some speculate these are elemental spirits, the last remnants of ancient earth energies that occasionally surface when tectonic boundaries shift. Others lean toward the paranormal, suggesting these are the same fire devils spoken of in legends from around the world, beings tied to volcanoes, able to walk through flame and smoke, neither living nor dead. And then there are those who think they're extraterrestrial in origin, not in the flying saucer sense, but in the non-terrestrial sense, not of this earth, but under it, something else entirely. Whatever they are, they don't stay long. They come and go like sparks, brief, bright, and unpredictable, but they leave behind scorched earth, melted footprints, and the kind of heat that doesn't fade with the sun. And if the earth can create creatures of fire, what happens when the myth walks on four legs, speaks in riddles, and wears the mask of something familiar? Because in the next story, the being is not made of flame, but of story, a trickster, a creator, a destroyer, one of the oldest beings in California myth, still laughing across the desert wind. 29. Coyote, mythic trickster, spirit being. In the myths of native California, and far beyond, coyote is more than an animal, more than a predator, more than a scrappy scavenger sneaking behind dumpsters and across highway shoulders at night. He's a god, a fool, a liar, a teacher, a thief, a creator of worlds and a bringer of disaster, often in the same story. Coyote isn't just a character in indigenous lore. He is the lore, the walking contradiction, the original unreliable narrator. Among tribes like the Maidu, Yokuts, Pomo, Ohlone, and Luiseno, Coyote appears again and again, never quite the same, yet always recognizable. Sometimes he creates rivers by dragging his tail across the land. Other times he accidentally sets the world on fire trying to impress someone. He might steal fire for humanity in one tale and then destroy an entire village in the next, usually out of boredom or some cosmic misunderstanding. Unlike other mythic figures who are elevated, distant, or flawless, Coyote is alarmingly relatable. He's hungry, curious, jealous, brilliant in bursts, and catastrophically dumb in others. He wants what he wants, and consequences are usually someone else's problem, and that's the trap. You laugh, you roll your eyes, And just when you start thinking he's a harmless clown, he changes the world. In that way, Coyote is less a monster and more of a force, a wild card embedded in the fabric of reality. And in the stories of California, he walks the line between creation and chaos with the swagger of someone who's already been forgiven. But don't mistake the humor for harmlessness. The older stories, the ones not softened for classrooms or children's books, portray Coyote as deeply unsettling. He lies to gods. He tricks the dead. He speaks with thunder and walks in dreams. He has no consistent moral compass, yet somehow always gets the last word. People who have spent time in the desert will sometimes say, that wasn't a coyote, that was Coyote, as in the being, the one who sees more than he lets on. Some hikers have reported seeing lone coyotes watching them for extended periods, not hunting, not fleeing, just staring. A few say they've seen them smile. Others have encountered one coyote on the trail only to turn around and find it again, somehow ahead of them. The same scar, the same posture, as if the animal were reading a script they weren't privy to. Then there are the dreams. Many native traditions warn that dreaming of Coyote is not just a dream, it's a visitation, a message, or a test. You won't know which until it's too late. Folklorists suggest that the coyote archetype functions as a cultural mirror, a reminder that the world isn't black and white, and that wisdom often arrives dressed as absurdity. Maybe, but it also raises a more uncomfortable possibility that chaos is part of creation, that some mistakes are meant to happen, that the universe doesn't reward goodness. It rewards cunning. Coyote isn't gone. He never was. He just changes with the road. He lives in the cracks between freeway signs and in the shimmer above desert pavement. He doesn't need to hide because you'll never see him unless he wants to be seen. And if the myth still walks among us wearing a grin and leaving riddles behind, then maybe it makes sense that some beings aren't coyotes or monsters at all. They're bigger, older, silent giants of forest and sky, beings that don't just watch travelers, but shape the storms themselves. 30. Forest, mountain giants, or sky beings. Some legends are loud, all fire and claws and glowing eyes. Others just stand there. The giants of California fall into the second category, not the brutish kind, swinging clubs or grunting through folklore. These giants don't roar. They loom. They appear for a moment, tall as trees, still as silence, and then vanish, leaving behind not footprints, but impressions in the atmosphere, a shift in the light, a coldness in the air, a lingering certainty that you just saw something no one else will ever believe. Indigenous tribes across California, including the Yurok, Karuk, Wintu, and Miwok, all carry stories of colossal beings who walked the high mountain trails long before humans. Sometimes they're referred to as sky people or watchers or forest fathers, not gods exactly and not spirits either, something in between, personifications of the mountains themselves, sentinels, movers of weather, shapers of fate. Descriptions vary, but they follow a shape, humanoid, impossibly tall, 10, 15, even 20 feet high, with features obscured by light or shadow, not fuzzy like a camera glitch, but almost too defined, as if the human eye isn't built to comprehend the geometry of their faces. Their presence is rarely accompanied by violence, but it is almost always followed by change, storms, rock slides, avalanches. It's said that when the giants walk, the landscape listens. One particularly old Wintu tale describes a being known as Puilik, a giant who sleeps inside the mountains and only stirs when humans forget how to live with respect for the land. When Puilik stands, the earth trembles. The story ends not with a battle, but with the land going quiet, the river stopping, the trees leaning toward the mountain as if bracing for what comes next. In modern times, reports of these mountain giants are less frequent, but not gone. A group of campers near Lake Almanor in the late 1990s described seeing what they thought was a tree uprooted by a storm until it moved. It had no eyes they could see, no mouth, but they all reported the same thing, the feeling of being seen, not in the casual way, but in the way a mountain might notice you, as something very small, as something temporary. Another sighting came from a pair of storm chasers in the Sierra Nevadas. They were filming a summer lightning event when one of them noticed a shape in the background, tall, pale, and briefly silhouetted by a flash. They reviewed the footage. There it was again, a form that was not cloud, not tree, not human, something upright, something watching. The footage was inconclusive. It always is. Skeptics call it pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see shapes in randomness. A tree becomes a torso, a shadow becomes a limb, but that doesn't explain the dreams reported by those who've seen them, the waking dreams, the ones where something huge stands at the edge of the forest and doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't approach, just waits. For what? No one knows. Maybe they're guardians, maybe they're warnings, or maybe they're the last remnants of a different order of things, one where the land was sovereign, and anything that walked upon it did so under watchful eyes 1,000 years older than roads. Either way, if you ever find yourself alone on a high mountain ridge and the wind suddenly dies, not slowly but all at once, look up. You may not be the tallest thing out there, and you may not be alone.